that. But thank you so much for joining us still. We have one more segment for today, all about monitoring observability for your clusters. And those shorts were actually to represent Kubernetes is all about these controllers, all about that reconciliation process. So, I think our ASL can't hear. I hope everyone else can hear me. Sound out in chat if you can still hear me. I want to make sure that's Bobby. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. I got my audio. I hear you. Let's make sure we get this going. I took ASL in college, but I am not very good and I don't remember it anymore. So maybe we can switch back. Let me see here. Looks like people are still here. Oh, no, here still. Okay. I think we have to swap back. Just a second. There we go. We want to make sure that everyone can hear us. Arthur, can you still hear us? Okay. We'll figure that one out. Awesome. So once we have a private chat. So once you hear us again, we can still swap you out, Arthur. I know your arms get tired doing that. I can't imagine. So thank you everyone still for coming. Bobby, welcome to the show. And I know it's super late for you. We have people around the world watching us. I know we have people in London. We have people throughout the US. Where are you?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all for having me. So this week I am in Sydney. So it is 2:30 a.m., but
Wow.
still just as happy and excited to speak about observability today. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So what do you do with observability at AWS and what do you want to show off today?
Yeah, sure. So a little bit about myself. I am a specialist solutions architect with the observability team here at AWS. So services we support include CloudWatch, X-Ray, Amazon Managed Prometheus, Managed Grafana, as well as our AWS distro for OpenTelemetry. A lot of what we do here as a specialist SA is helping our end customers and our account teams with all things observability. So customers looking to migrate onto AWS, customers that are in I guess what I call like inflection points for observability. So places where during your cloud migration or during your phases of cloud adoption. So either we're in a migrate stage, maybe we're modernizing. In either of those stages, observability is important, but it's important for different reasons. So let's say if we're looking at modernization, when we're moving to containers, you need to think a lot of like, how do we go about doing instrumentation? Are we adding tracing? Whereas on the migration side, it's okay. How are we going to use these new output signals that we're getting from managed collectors like Amazon CloudWatch, for example? How can we use those vended metrics to supplement our existing capabilities? But kind of in a nutshell, that's what I do. And in today's discussion, what we'll be going over is a little bit into observability, specifically for Amazon EKS.
Right, and we've been talking about clusters and how to manage clusters. We have not talked about today yet how to just see what's going on, how to make sure that things are working as you intend, because you can always send configuration or send an application to a cluster, but if you don't verify that it's working properly, that things are at a certain level of usage for CPU and memory and disk storage and everything else, like you could be in for a bad time. So monitoring these clusters in production is a very critical piece of any workload in cluster, and that's why I'm really excited to see what you've been working on and how this works with EKS clusters and the observability pieces.
Awesome. Yeah,
I
great.
can
Thank you.
pull in your screen here for a second. There it is.
Yeah. So what we're taking a look at here is you may have seen this if you've been following any of the observability content we've been doing, but this is a part of our One Observability workshop. And what we're highlighting here is a pet adoption website. And there are a few different components. So we have our front end. This is EKS. Actually, that made it too small. This is EKS running on top of Fargate. And then we have a few different ALBs that are running on ECS on top of, I'm sorry, it's EKS on EC2. And then here we actually have ECS running on Fargate. For the purposes of today's discussion and a little bit of demo we'll do, we're going to focus in on the EKS cluster that's running our front end. But I did want to show everyone here what our overall application architecture looks like and the different components. In short, this runs a pet adoption website. And if you are interested, this is a workshop that you can run in your own AWS accounts. It takes about an hour to set up. And I would say And if you are interested in doing this as like through your AWS account team, that's something we can help facilitate as well.
Cool.
But
Yeah,
definitely
I
check
just
out this workshop if you haven't already.
I just put the link in chat so everyone can head over there and block out some time to run through it. It looks like there's a ton of difference. I see Node
Oh
and
yeah,
Go and Python and Java. So this is very much a multi-language, full sort of microservices infrastructure. It looks awesome.
yeah. And thanks for calling that out. Well, that's one of the main reasons behind what we did with this workshop is to show a variety of different types of compute. So you notice we're using both EKS and ECS. We're using an API gateway like Lambda to DynamoDB setup, as well as like some step functions, different
Yeah.
languages, different types of compute, just to show all the different ways you can achieve observability. But of course, today we'll focus on the EKS portions.
Well, and that's a good call out too. Like if anyone thinks, a lot of people say like, oh, I only use serverless or I only use Kubernetes. Like if you're not using those together, you're missing out. Like there is so much value in having a Kubernetes cluster with Lambda functions that if you have never used them in simple ways to deploy some things, like I love that pattern and I've used step functions a lot. And I love being able to take a Kubernetes cluster and say like, hey, you know what? Like I don't want this to run inside the cluster because as the cluster changes, if things go down, or I just need a simple webhook or something like that, I can very easily stand up my Lambda or step functions and do similar things outside the cluster that don't need to be internal to that cluster. So again, if you haven't done it, I think it's a great pattern. I have run production in those scenarios where we use both, and I think it's great. So it's cool that you call it out here in this workshop as like a real world use case.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Well, I can't really take much of the credit at all, but do check out the on this page that does have our contributors. One of my colleagues, Maya, is a essentially the founder of this workshop, and yeah,
Nice.
awesome person if you get to work with him, and definitely all, just about all the credit I would send to him and the other amazing people that have made contributions to this workshop. But yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's take a look at what we're going to cover first is we'll take a look at some of the existing capabilities we have natively within Amazon CloudWatch. Specifically, we're going to take a look at container insights. And while we took a look earlier at that overall application architecture, I want to show a bit about how we're ingesting metric and log data into container insights. So what container insights is, think of it like very simply put, it's two things. One, it's a way to ingest telemetry from your container workloads into CloudWatch. So we'll give you easier ways to do that, either through a container agent, FluentBit. We have for ECS, we're using FireLens, and then we're also, we can take in Prometheus metrics as well. But the idea is we're giving you easy ways to perform the ingest. And then the second part of container insights is part of that console experience, which I'm going to show off here in just a bit. And that's to give you a easy way to start navigating all of these logs and metrics we're collecting on your behalf.
Cool.
Yeah. So
Is there anything that with a Kubernetes cluster, I know the workshop will walk through it, but what do I need to enable on my cluster to make sure that this starts happening? I install the CloudWatch log agent. Is there something else? So I know we have a daemon set for CloudWatch agent and everything else, but like, is there anything else that I need to configure or set up to make sure that like I'm getting everything that you're seeing here in the dashboard? And actually, you'll need to make that a little bigger too.
Oh yeah, of course. I can make that larger. So there are. So let's say, for example, if I'm using, and this is a new capability we launched just recently, which is an add-on for EKS for an OpenTelemetry collector. So let's say if I just want to collect, maybe I'm exposing some Prometheus metrics and I want to collect those. You can do that with container insights. And I'll show you. So you can do a little or you can do a lot. But just by grabbing those CloudWatch agents and getting them deployed either as a daemon set or sidecar, either of those can start getting you some information into container insights. As for doing the full setup based on the type of compute you're operating on, or the launch type, that's where I would want to have to consult our documentation on exactly what steps you need to take.
Right. And I do believe we were just showing off the EKS blueprints a little while ago. If you're using blueprints, I'm pretty sure there was an add-on in there for the CloudWatch agent as well. So you might be able to do all of that through blueprints, which we had already shown off today. Of just like, hey, we will also want this deployed and configured in the cluster as a daemon sets. But if individual applications have specific settings, you can mount that as a sidecar. So both options is a great thing to have.
Yep. So for example, if we take a look here, you'll see I have two distinct namespaces. First, I have the container insights, which gives me, and I'll show off a little bit of the metrics here because it's kind of neat. So we have different aggregations of these different dimensions. So for example, cluster namespace service, or cluster namespace and pod name. And what we can do here is, we have 131 metrics. We can sort it by just different namespaces, sorting by our pod names, or even just looking at different metric names. So if you've ever using the CloudWatch console, just a couple neat tricks you can do here. If I go to like pod CPU utilization, if I hit the drop down and I hit like maybe just add to search, this is just going to show me every metric within this aggregation with pod CPU utilization. Normally you'd say, okay, now if I want to select everything, I just hit this checkbox and that gives me everything. And then I can add that to a dashboard and then we're good forever. The problem is what happens if we start adding new pods or we start adding new clusters, those static definitions change and then the dashboard gets out of date, the widgets get out of date. So instead of doing that, what you could do is leverage a new feature we have called Metrics Insights, which what we'll demonstrate here, where I just add it to a search, and then I can just hit graph with SQL. And what this gives me is now I have every single metric that matches the expression from Container Insights, CPU utilization, cluster, and then it's grouped by the cluster name, namespace, and pod. Now, what's really neat here is maybe I don't care about the cluster name, or the namespace, right? And then I can just start doing my own aggregations.
And that's just a dynamic lookup, and it says every time we're going to run this command and find everything right now and put that in the graph.
Exactly. So as we add new features, as we add new, not features, but like let's say you start adding new pods, you start adding new clusters, these widgets will completely stay up to date. And it's designed to be able to slice and dice across potentially millions of metrics.
Turns out SQL's fast for looking up data. Who would have thought?
And then, so like another neat thing about this, right? And I know, we want to talk about EKS a little bit more, and we will. But what you'll notice here is we're implementing this as a metric math expression. So if you've ever used metric math, what's great about it is it works well with just get metric data, meaning that if I'm using Manage Grafana or Grafana, and I'm using the CloudWatch plugin for Grafana, it's not a different API call you need to send, right? It's just leveraging get metric data, and then we just use a math expression to use this. What's even better about this is we can also wrap this or wrap search expressions with things like limits and sorts. So instead of just giving me the everything, I can say, just give me the top 10 descending order. So there's some pretty neat stuff we can do there. And specifically when you start looking at metrics we're getting from container workloads that are a little bit higher in cardinality, being able to leverage these metric math expressions and queries can be incredibly powerful.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah. So like I mentioned, first, I guess the next thing we want to ask is how do those metrics get inside of Container Insights? And how we do that with CloudWatch is actually through a feature called Embedded Metric Format. And what that does for us is instead of writing to the metrics API through put metric data, what we end up doing is we're leveraging CloudWatch logs. So we'll put called put log events. And then that will contain log data as well as metric data. And then CloudWatch logs is smart enough to then extract that metric data out and then give us those CloudWatch metrics. So let's take a look at some of the log groups that are created for Container Insights.
If you can make that a little bit bigger too, I can
Oh yeah.
make out some of the text. Those look like pod IPs that are pulling in for each log, right?
Yep. Yep. So these represent different log streams. Of course, a log stream we want to think of
There's
as
some
just a
notes.
unique contributor for a specific log group. Um, so let's take a look at a couple of these logs. And we can see, we should be able to find out. Alright. Let's do. Okay, so you will see some errors here. And this is because I was actually testing out the hotel add-in earlier today. Unfortunately, to be perfectly candid, I didn't get it working the way I wanted it to. So there are some errors here where I wouldn't expect to see them. But generally speaking, I'll see if I can find a different example here.
Oh, it's all good. I mean, errors are part of what everyone's used to looking at. We all know configuring things and making them work is a lot of trial and error sometimes.
Yep. So let's take a look at, in this case, we have performance metrics coming from Container Insights. And like we have our two different pods here. And let's take a look and just expand one of these log groups. And here what we can see is we have some information about our cluster, instance ID, our namespace, and then we'll also start getting some telemetry here, or collecting. And if we were to then search, let's say, for CloudWatch. I spelled that. And if we don't get anything, I'll see it. Well, we'll circle back to this because I think there's a couple other examples where we can show what the EMF format looks like. But all in all, the main, pretty much the main takeaway is we're able to take Container Insights is creating these log groups, which are then being extracted out as metrics.
Right.
Okay. So now that we have Container Insights, we have these different logs, we have metrics coming in. I was able to show some stuff you can do with the metrics console right out of the gate, but I mentioned earlier that Container Insights also gives us a way to visualize some of these data points coming in from EKS. So one place to see this would just be by doing a container map. I'm actually going to zoom out a little bit just to give us a better idea of this map. But here we can see I can filter by cluster. So I have my different ECS clusters. And then, of course, I have my EKS cluster where we have our pet site. And then if I do a full screen on this, zooming it back in a bit more, we can see where we have color coding at the cluster level to give us some indication of, if I were to select this, we can see overall CPU usage, memory utilization, network I/O.
Nice. So these give you an actual visualization of everything running in the cluster. And are the lines connecting at traffic patterns, or are those just I'm trying to zoom in a little bit more on I see
Oh yeah,
namespace
yeah,
and applications.
exactly. So let's say if we go to um, for example, here I have a Prometheus namespace, and then a couple different EKS services where I'm running an ADOT collector or doing exporting the Prometheus metrics out.
Cool. And when you all of these applications you mentioned, you can click on any one of them. You see all of the actual information, CPU, memory, network utilization. So yeah, that's cool. You can just dive into
Yep.
any one. And right there, you set up alerts on, hey, if this hits a threshold or whatever it is you want, you can create that right within the console itself.
Exactly. And then outside of like the container map, if we're to go to our start viewing resources, there's a couple different neat things we get here as well. So let's actually just filter in for our pet site. So we know this is our EKS cluster. So this is a similar view to that map, but what we're going to be doing here is looking at different types of drill downs. So instead of EKS clusters, maybe I want to take a look at the different namespaces here. And then I can start adding different filters for maybe I want to see, I don't know, take a look at what the default namespace looks like. Also being able to look at it from the different pods. We can take a look at check out different pod performance. So maybe I want to see what the X-ray demon's up to. Under here, actions, I can then see average CPU memory, but then we can even take a look and say, hey, take me to the place where I can view application logs. And what we're doing here is we're actually deep linking into CloudWatch Logs Insights, where we're going to run a query on your behalf. So we can see we're looking at the container insights, application log group, and then we are looking for any logs coming from this container. And then we can dive directly in to see what's going on from perspective.
We're right about at time. Was there one last thing I think you wanted to show off, or is there anything?
Yeah, very last thing I would say is recently, about last month, we launched a new feature, and I brought this up earlier for EKS. So it's an Amazon EKS add-on for the AWS distro for OpenTelemetry. So if you've used add-ons for EKS, we now have one for an OpenTelemetry collector. And what's really great about that is now we can then, and if I'm sure everyone here has probably had some experience using OpenTelemetry, but just to reiterate, where it's very powerful is you're able to instrument with essentially however you'd like to, right? So we can collect in OpenTrace, we can then send that to X-Ray or AWS X-Ray, for example. So it's incredibly powerful, and then having this add-on capability can make those deployments much easier. And not even to speak of earlier today when we were talking about EKS blueprints, which I think is pretty neat.
Yeah, and that's getting all your metrics and data in this OpenTelemetry format. It allows it to be portable to say like, hey, I want to view this in CloudWatch. I want to view this in Grafana or Prometheus. Something else that is like, hey, we need a format that's consistent first. And that's exactly what OpenTelemetry as a standard does. And AWS distro using that, it allows us to integrate that deeply with the rest of AWS ecosystem for console and other tools that we provide for customers, right?
Yep. Yeah, and like it's customer flexibility and customer choice, right?
Yeah.
And I think yeah, there's I'm excited about what's coming with Hotel. So nice. Hopefully everybody else is too.
Yeah. Thank you everyone who joined us today. We have this stream in this time slot for the rest of this week and one day next week as well. If you want to stick around on Twitch, the serverless folks are joining to talk about their new step functions. Has a really cool interface to like debug and figure out what's going on in your step functions to make sure that they're working properly, the executions, everything. Just stick around for the stream. I think it's gonna be great. I'm gonna check it out as well. But again, thank you everyone who joined us today. Come back tomorrow. We'll have another set of great demos and talks all about Kubernetes and everything else we've been doing at AWS. So hope to see you all tomorrow.